Hello, I'm Will Sampson. Welcome to the Woodworking Network Podcast. Welcome to the Woodworking Network Podcast. Join us as we explore the business of woodworking, big and small, and what it takes to succeed. I'm Will Sampson. This episode is sponsored by FDMC Magazine, and don't forget to take our survey at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcast-survey. Today we'll be talking with Mitch Taylor, Architectural Services Representative for the Woodwork Institute. He has a lot of interesting information about standards for architectural woodworking, but first I want to talk about what constitutes quality. Every woodworking operation I have ever visited says they do quality work. But what does that mean? I've been in shops that were dark and dirty with debris everywhere and no visibly coherent production flow, but they claimed to be doing quality work. I've met woodworkers who did everything with manual equipment and disdained any automation processes, but looking at their finished cabinets, things like door gaps were often inconsistent. Still, they assured me they did quality work. At the other end of the scale, I visited huge factories, cranking out thousands of parts, and wondered what their version of quality looks like. Looking at finished work first, quality might seem more obvious. Parts are immaculately finished and fit together consistently and correctly. Functional products like doors and drawers work as they should, opening and closing smoothly and precisely. But those kinds of results can come from all kinds of shops at all levels of price and experience. I remember vividly years ago attending a show for students at the famed College of the Redwoods woodworking program in California, and then flying immediately to attend the International Contemporary Furniture Fair in New York City. The student work I saw in California far outshone the so-called professional work of some of the world's top designers on display in New York City. Parts in the professional show were inconsistently fit and finished compared to the immaculate student work I had just seen. For example, if your fingers slid to the underside of a tabletop or deep in a drawer in the student work, everything was still just as nicely finished as the more visible portions. In the professional work, touching the underside of a tabletop often felt like sandpaper, and forget about the insides of drawers or other less visible parts. When it gets to bidding and contracts, how do shops know they are working to the same standards the client expects? And how do clients know what to expect? This also applies to setting a standard for work within your shop or factory. Do you have established standards for how things should be done and measurable expectations for the results? Do you train your employees to uphold those standards? This all can be a real challenge from beginning to end. Too often customers have very little understanding of woodworking and frequently have unrealistic expectations. Architects often aren't up to speed with current technology, materials, and processes. That means that they can specify things that are difficult or impossible to build with common processes, equipment, and materials, or they fail to recognize newer, better ways to do things. And then there are the subjective issues. Are hand-cut dovetails superior quality to machine-cut dovetails? Does the customer care? Or does it all depend on the fit and finish? Speaking of finishing, is a complex multi-step finish necessarily higher quality than a simpler but exceptionally consistent and durable finish? Or do all finishes have to meet certain standards to earn the title of quality? Shops can set their own standards as to what constitutes quality. They can take advantage of standards organizations like ANSI, AWI, Woodwork Institute, and AMAC in Canada. But without adopting consistent standards and educating employees, clients, specifiers, and suppliers, there's no guarantee that two different people talking about quality work will have any hope of talking about the same thing. Before we get to Mitch Taylor, let's pause for a word from our sponsor. FDMC Magazine is your vital source of information to improve your woodworking business, whether it is keeping you apprised of the latest advances in manufacturing, helping you solve your wood technology problems with Gene Wengert, or inspiring you with case histories about successful businesses and best practices. FDMC Magazine is there to be the sharpest business tool in your shop. Learn more and subscribe for free at woodworkingnetwork.com/FDMC. Today, our guest on the Woodworking Network podcast is Mitch Taylor, Architectural Services Representative from the Woodwork Institute. We're going to talk a little bit about architectural woodworking standards. Welcome to the Woodworking Network podcast, Mitch.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
First of all, let's talk about real basics here. What is the Woodworking Institute and how did it come about? What does it do?
The Woodwork Institute is a nonprofit organization that was founded back in the 50s to promote and to create standards, uniform standards for architectural millwork of all types, partly in order to even the playing field between shops that are bidding and to provide services so that when architects spec something and get bids, that they would get consistent bids on what they were looking for. We've been in business ever since. We do create and publish the architectural woodwork, now the North American Architectural Woodwork Standards, in conjunction with AUMAC in Canada. It is a joint publication by the groups.
So that sort of begs a really basic question. What are architectural woodwork standards and why are they important? Is it just trying to get everybody on the same playing field? Is that the idea?
That is a large part of it. We're trying to create, for one thing, a minimum standard of work for not necessarily residential work, but for any commercial and institutional work in particular. Create a minimum standard of construction so people know that they're going to get durable work, and then to create uniform standards for the fit and finish and the rest of the elements so that when an architect puts a project out to bid, they can expect that all the bidders are going to produce pretty much the same product that is delivered and installed.
So that they can expect to have apples and apples bids instead of everything all over the map.
That's correct. I'm sure if, having been in the business myself, it always drove me crazy to go in and bid a project based on how it really was supposed to be done and be undercut by the shops who planned to do it in an inferior way and not pay much attention to what was required.
Yeah, I do an annual pricing survey in FDMC magazine, and we've been doing it for more than 20 years, and some of the projects get bid with prices that are up to 6 times what the high bid, 6 times what the low bid is.
Yeah,
it's pretty crazy out there. So how did these standards get developed? Do you work with shops, and how does it come about?
The standards, there's a standards committee, a technical committee that gets together and has developed them. They are developed in conjunction with the shops, but also with the architects. And we've worked hard to work with both ends of it to come up with standards that are fair and buildable, but that also are going to end up with a quality product. And one of the nice things about them is some uniformity and rules to be able to establish whether you're getting apples and apples. There are so many terms in woodworking that are weasel words. They can be read different ways, and that happens in specs too. When you just say, "Oh, I want premium work," well, that's not by itself much of a standard. Different shops can have different interpretations of that. By getting uniform language, now we know, yes, that's what that means. That means you will hold these tolerances. Your work will be done this way.
That's great. I constantly hear from woodworking businesses about problems with specifications provided by architects that aren't current or don't meet accepted industry standards or just plain won't work. How do you educate the architects and other specifiers to bring them on board and get them to follow your book?
Well, I go around to architects' offices before COVID, of course. At this point, it tends to be by phone, but we do seminars for architectural firms, and then we provide spec review. This is something we do in the interest of getting specifications that are doable. And when we look at projects, when I have projects to inspect, I read through the specs, and if I see issues with them, I will contact the architectural firm and make an attempt to have them allow me to do a review of their specifications and come back and fix outdated language. There are some specs out there that are horrible. I know there's a what we call a zombie spec out there that lists about 6 different shops that would be acceptable millwork companies to do the work. And I don't think any of those 6 shops are still in business. The spec dates from 25 or 30 years ago, and it still just keeps going around. That's so funny. We do our best to get rid of that.
Yeah. No, I can understand. So how do shops get access to these specifications and so that they know that what's what too and are following along and understand what is being specified? Do they join the institute, or how does it work?
We don't require people to join the institute. If a shop has a question for interpretation on a spec on a project they're bidding, assuming it's one that calls for the use of the standards, we're pretty happy to help them. I get calls regularly from people saying, hey, here's something in the spec. I'm not sure what they're really looking for. And I'll come back to them and say, well, as we read it, here's what it would be. And on occasion, contact the architect. So that's tricky because we're not in the official contract relationship with the architect and the owner. We're outside of that box. So we have to be careful how we work with them.
So do the specifiers then use any terms like, this job is to meet Woodworking Institute specifications or anything like that?
That's correct. The architectural firm will put in the specifications that the work is to be done to custom grade or premium grade of the North American Architectural Woodwork Standards. They typically put in a little boilerplate that says they may be specifying things that are above that grade, and where that happens, the spec always rules. But the basic is per the Architectural Woodwork Standards.
Now, I know that I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I know that Woodwork Institute isn't the only standards organization in North America. A lot of people that are listening to this on the East Coast and all will probably think of AWI as another organization. So what is you're working with Canada, I heard you say earlier, and also pretty much on the West Coast, is that correct?
That's correct, although I actually get calls from all over the country looking at the standards, and I do spec review for people all over the place, but primarily we are West Coast in Canada. For a long time, from 2009, I believe, we were co-publishing a book of standards with Architectural Woodwork Institute. After the last edition of that book was published, Architectural Woodwork Institute and Woodwork Institute went their separate ways. And AWI is developing a new set of ANSI standards. we feel that the architectural standards format, the North American architectural format, has advantages because it's one book, as opposed to having a multiple set of ANSI standards that have to be referenced for individual portions of the work. And at this time, the AWI standards require you to reference both the ANSI standards in multiple sections and then back to their original architectural standards book, which makes it pretty complex for a spec writer.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I hear too from all sorts of shops, that they hear all about this complexity and standards, and they think all of it, the talk doesn't apply to them. Why should shops care about these standards? What does it do for them?
Well, again, it provides a set of uniform terms that you can go back when you get a dispute between the owner and the shop over what was delivered. The architect may be saying, "Oh, you should have done this. I don't believe your work is up to snuff." Having the standards means that there's something you can go back to and say, well, yes, in fact, the fit and finish of these, the alignment of everything, the matching between veneers, this does fall within this specific set of standards. Otherwise, you get into a lot of, well, I think this is premium, and the architect saying, well, I don't think it's good enough. Now you have a lawsuit.
Right.
Having something that you can reference that has numeric standards, so a joint has to be this tight for this percentage of its length, and this joint has to be this flush, and that now you can go out there and measure it and say, yeah, it meets it, no, it doesn't. And this provides, certainty for the shop.
Oh, that's a great thing too. And since so many of the particularly the smaller shops started with people that just got into it because they liked woodworking and not necessarily because they had formal training in it, it's great to have something that they can use as basically a Bible to go by on what they're doing.
Yeah. And some of the things like our standards for veneers and lumber in particularly, if you don't have a standard that's really for the finished product, you have a problem because, you know how it is. You go buy lumber. FAS is a standard for lumber, but it's nothing that would be usable for the finished work because obviously FAS lumber includes defects that need to be cut out of it. And I had the experience of a project with a whole lot of mahogany doors. The first set were delivered and were beautiful. The second set of doors were a disaster. And it was because the quality of mahogany available had gone down in the meantime. And the shop said, well, I bought FAS lumber. Well, that's not meaningful. Okay, FAS isn't a standard for that. So you need those that are oriented to the finished product.
I see. So we get standards that talk about results rather than talking about what you take at the beginning of the project.
Correct.
Now, where can folks go to learn more about architectural standards? What's your website and all that?
The woodworkinstitute.com is our website. And we, as I say, our philosophy is the standard should be out there for everyone to use. So you can download the North American Architectural Woodwork Standards for free off of our website. And we promise not to spam you. We do want your email address, but that's strictly so we can send any revisions or errata to you so you keep up with the book. Our philosophy is that what Woodwork Institute's real product is inspection and certification of the work. Our job is, what we sell is that we're going to make sure the work is actually done per the standards, we feel the standard should be available for everybody, that they don't have to go out and spend a bunch of money on them before they can try and do the work.
That's a real service. That's great. And again, that, even somebody that's just thinking about getting into serious architectural woodwork, they should take a look at the standards and see where they want to go on things, and see if their skills and are going to be up to speed to meet those standards.
That's correct. And the other thing is, we get shops are bidding work that's to be done to the standards when, and unfortunately, I'm sure you're familiar that there are too many shops out there who don't really read the specifications. There's a level of work, certainly big projects with bigger shops, they are reading it, but you get a mid-level of work where a lot of times they're not paying much attention to it.
Right. They come at it and they say, oh yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, exactly. My brother-in-law builds kitchen cabinets. He can provide them for this school. So we try and encourage education on it and say, hey, here's where the stuff is. Here's the standard. And if you're going to do this, you probably should be reading these parts of it.
That sounds great. Well, I'm definitely going to have you and probably some of your colleagues back on the podcast to talk some more about this, because I think that we could get into some of the details about different standards, and we could learn a lot from it. But I appreciate you coming today and giving us a general overview of the situation. I think it's an area that a lot more of our listeners could benefit from.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Mitch.
That's it for today. To learn more about the Woodwork Institute, visit woodworkinstitute.com. If you're looking for more of our podcasts, you can find all of them at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcasts and in popular podcast channels. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks again to today's sponsor, FDMC Magazine. If you have a comment or topic you'd like us to explore, contact me at will.sampson@woodworkingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening.